My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the vibrations quick and insistent. I glanced at the screen, where a name I hadn't seen in years appeared. Grandma. My heart gave a little lurch in my chest as I picked up the phone. The message was short, handwritten in delicate, familiar script. Nina, darling, I hope you can join us for a family dinner. It's been far too long. We're having it next Sunday, and I'd love to see you there. Love, Grandma. I stared at the words for a moment, the faint scent of nostalgia filling my senses. It had been years since I'd been back to the family home, back to the house where I grew up, to the faces that used to feel like home. The dinner was a rare occasion. Grandma hadn't hosted one in ages. The entire family gathered around her, under one roof, with laughter filling the air, the clink of silverware on plates, and the sense of belonging that came with these dinners. I swallowed the wave of emotion rising in my throat, but I couldn't ignore the knot that formed in my stomach at the thought of returning. My brother, Paul, would be there. Paul, with his tight-lipped smiles and skeptical eyes. Paul, who never really understood what I did for a living, and who would probably corner me, as he had done in the past, and ask pointed questions about my work, the questions that I couldn't answer, not without breaking a dozen confidentiality agreements. I couldn't help but sigh. It wasn't just the job that made things awkward. No, it was the way Paul looked at me sometimes. The way he talked down to me like I was still a little girl in his eyes, trying to be a professional. He always implied that I was just a freelancer, that I wasn't really doing anything significant. His eyes always narrowed when I told him about my work in cryptography, his voice dripping with skepticism. What kind of work is that, Nina? A bunch of code and fancy encryption? Come on, you can't expect me to believe you're doing anything important. And yet, the work I did was critical to national security, but I couldn't tell him that. As I stood there, staring at the message, I couldn't decide whether I wanted to go or not. Grandma, though, had a way of drawing people together, even when things were strained, even when the tension in the room could be cut with a knife. Out of love for her, I decided I would go. Maybe it would be worth it. Maybe it would be nice to see the family again, even if it meant dealing with Paul's sideways glances and probing questions. I glanced at my closet. My usual wardrobe was filled with sleek professional outfits, tailored blazers, fitted skirts, sharp heels. The type of clothes that made me look like I worked in the tech world, even if I didn't always say exactly what I did. But today, I wasn't going to dress up for anyone. I wasn't going to walk into that house like I was trying to impress them. So, I grabbed a simple sweater, a pair of jeans, and boots. I didn't need to prove anything to them. This dinner wasn't about me fitting their expectations. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment before grabbing my keys. Grandma would understand. Maybe the rest of the family wouldn't. But that was just the way it had always been. I could already hear the chatter, feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me as I walked through that front door. The tension in the air would be thick, I was sure of it. But I would be there. For Grandma. The evening started as I had imagined. The familiar clink of silverware, the hum of polite conversation, and the faint welcoming scent of roast chicken filling the room. Grandma's house had an air of nostalgia, a place that once felt like home, despite the years that had passed. As I sat down at the large dinner table, I was acutely aware of the tension. It wasn't the kind of tension you could point out directly, but rather the kind that thickened the air as if everyone had something they were holding back. Everyone, that is, except Paul. I could tell he'd been waiting for this moment. His sharp eyes flickered to me with something unreadable as he ladled mashed potatoes onto his plate. Grandma, bless her heart, was trying to keep the conversation light, asking how I'd been, how work was going. I deflected her questions, offering only vague, non-specific answers, knowing that if I gave too much, it would only provoke Paul. But then, the silence broke. "So, Nina," Paul said, his voice dripping with that all-too-familiar condescension. "Still doing that app development thing, huh?" He said it loud enough for the entire table to hear, casting a glance at our cousins, who were busy pretending not to be eavesdropping. I nodded, keeping my tone level. "Yes, still working with software. It's a niche market, but I enjoy it." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Paul smirked, and I saw him lean back slightly in his chair, the small victories in his eyes telling me exactly where this conversation was going. "I gotta say, Nina," he continued, picking at his food with deliberate slowness, You always keep things pretty private. Hard to find any record of this so-called company you work for, though. It's a little strange, don't you think? I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. The room seemed to hold its breath for a beat, but I didn't let myself flinch. There was no need to, not yet. People in your line of work usually have some sort of company name or public profile. But you? Paul's eyes glinted as he shifted his gaze to our cousins, who looked uncomfortable now, their chatter slowing. I looked it up. Couldn't find anything, Nina. No business record, no public data, just nothing. I could feel the heat rise to my face, but I kept my expression neutral. No need to get defensive. I knew better than that. But I couldn't help but wonder if this was more than just a casual inquiry. The table felt smaller somehow, as if the walls had closed in, pushing me into the spotlight. I prefer keeping things quiet, I said, keeping my voice calm. It's not unusual for certain jobs. Classified work requires confidentiality. Paul raised an eyebrow, his voice lowering just enough to feel like a challenge. Classified work? In app development? He laughed softly, but it didn't sound genuine. I mean, come on, Nina. You can't seriously expect everyone to believe you're working for the government, can you? His words were like a subtle jab to the ribs, and I felt the pressure mount. My heart thudded harder in my chest. Grandma's worried eyes glanced between us, but I could see the doubt in her gaze too. Even she didn't seem to know what to believe. I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, Paul cut me off again. You know, I've done some digging myself, he said, his tone now a little too smug. And there's nothing to back up your story. No company, no government record, no nothing. He let the words hang in the air, letting them sink in like a slow poison. The murmurs from the rest of the table grew louder, cousins exchanging uneasy glances. Even Aunt Linda's fork paused halfway to her mouth, her eyes flickering nervously. I stayed calm, my mind racing for a way to deflect without breaking my cover. Paul, I said carefully, my voice measured. You know I can't share any more details. Some things are classified for a reason. But he wasn't done. So you're telling me you can't show proof of any of this? He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. No employment records, no official documents, and no way to corroborate your story. The room felt like it was closing in, and I could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on me, waiting for my response. I forced a tight smile, trying to maintain composure. My work doesn't require public records. It's just the nature of what I do. But Paul didn't back down. Sure, that's convenient, he shot back, looking to our cousins for support. So all this time, you've been working some mystery job for the government, but there's not a shred of proof? His voice was rising now, pulling attention from the rest of the family. Isn't it funny how all that's left is, well, nothing? I glanced at Grandma, her frail hands clutching the edge of the table. She looked as though she were preparing to speak, but before she could, Paul's next words hit harder than I could have imagined. You know, I had a little fun with this. I contacted a few people, local authorities, a few connections in the system. Turns out he paused for dramatic effect. There's no record of a Dr. Nina Forrester working in any government agency. Nothing at all. I felt the blood rush to my face as I sat there, frozen. A few cousins exchanged worried looks, and my grandmother let out a small, painful sigh, as if she already knew where this was heading. This wasn't a conversation anymore. This was an interrogation. The laughter and chatter around the table had already begun to die down as the uncomfortable weight of Paul's accusations lingered in the air. I could feel the eyes of my family boring into me, each question and implication chipping away at my calm, leaving me more exposed than I had ever been. My stomach churned, but I refused to show any sign of weakness. Then, without warning, Paul stood up from his chair, his face flushed with righteous indignation. The sound of the chair scraping across the floor made everyone pause. I think we've had enough of this charade, Paul said, his voice carrying across the table. His badge, tucked into his belt, gleamed under the dim light. Everyone froze, sensing the shift in energy. The murmur of voices died, leaving an eerie quiet. With deliberate slowness, he flashed his badge, holding it up for everyone to see. Nina Forrester, he began, his voice gaining strength with every word. I am placing you under arrest for digital fraud and identity fabrication. The words hit me like a slap to the face. The shock was immediate, But my training kicked in before I could react. I could feel the blood drain from my face, but I held my ground. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. Not in front of them. "What the hell are you talking about?" I managed to say, my voice steady, though every muscle in my body was screaming to fight back. Paul ignored my question, his eyes hard and unyielding. He gestured toward the table, where a stack of printed documents lay neatly. "I've got proof," he declared. "Bank records, surveillance photos, documents from a source I trust, all showing that Nina's been living off illicit funds and using false identities to cover her tracks." I could feel the temperature drop in the room. My grandmother's frail hands trembled on the table, her face a mix of confusion and concern. She wasn't the only one. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what was unfolding before them. I wanted to speak, to explain, to defend myself. But I couldn't, not without violating the very laws I had sworn to uphold. If I said anything, if I tried to explain even a fraction of the truth, I would be compromising national security. So, I remained silent. The tension built around me like a thick fog, but I didn't move, didn't speak. I refused to give Paul the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. "You're under arrest for digital fraud and identity theft," Paul repeated, his voice almost triumphant now. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." The room was dead silent, but the discomfort was palpable. My cousins, my aunts and uncles, they sat frozen, unsure how to react, their faces a mix of shock, disbelief, and confusion. No one spoke, no one moved, except for Grandma. She weakly lifted a hand, trying to speak, but her voice was barely above a whisper. "Paul, please," Grandma pleaded, her voice cracking with age and fear. "Don't do this." But Paul wasn't listening. He stood there, enjoying the spectacle, a look of cold determination in his eyes. "This is for the family's safety, Mom. I'm protecting all of us from the lies Nina's been telling." I could feel the weight of Grandma's pleading gaze on me, but I couldn't give in. This was bigger than me, bigger than my family. This was about a job that no one would ever understand. Paul gestured to the door, signaling for one of the officers at the edge of the room to approach. As they moved toward me, I took a slow, deliberate breath, the cuffs clicking tightly around my wrists as the officer placed them on me. The cold metal was a stark contrast to the warmth of the family dinner, and for a moment, everything felt surreal. The room was still, the silence thickening, broken only by the soft, shaky breath of my grandmother, who had now begun to weep. The family didn't know what to think. My aunts exchanged uneasy glances, cousins shuffled in their seats, and my uncles looked down, unsure of what to say. My mother stared at me, her face pale, as though she didn't recognize me anymore. And yet, through it all, Paul stood tall. His expression had changed, no longer angry, but almost satisfied, as though he had done the right thing. The humiliation was total, and I had no choice but to endure it. "Take her away," Paul said flatly, the words sending another shiver through the room. His eyes never left mine, as though he were daring me to defy him. I didn't. I couldn't. I kept my head down, my mind a swirl of emotion and adrenaline. But there was one thought that cut through the noise. No matter how this played out, nothing would ever be the same again. Just as Paul was about to continue his tirade, the front door of Grandma's house suddenly burst open. The sharp sound of the door hitting the wall caught everyone's attention. The room fell into a stunned silence, the air thick with the tension of what had already transpired. A group of men and women in sleek black suits stormed into the room, their presence commanding, their movements coordinated. They moved with the quiet authority of professionals who were used to high-stakes situations. At the front of the group was a woman who stood a little taller than the others, her posture rigid with purpose. A silver pin gleamed on her lapel, and her expression was as sharp as the suit she wore. She didn't need to introduce herself. The moment she walked into the room, everyone felt her authority. Paul's expression twisted in confusion, his eyes narrowing as the agents moved swiftly across the room. What is this?" Paul demanded, his hand instinctively reaching for his badge. "What the hell is going on here?" The woman, who was clearly in charge, stepped forward. "Paul Forrester, I assume," she said, her voice steady, her gaze unyielding. "We need to talk." Paul's posture stiffened, but he didn't back down. "What do you want with me?" he barked. I'm placing my sister under arrest for fraud and identity theft. You've got no right to. The woman cut him off, her tone firm and unwavering. Actually, we do. You're obstructing a federal operation. Paul's eyes went wide with disbelief as the agents fanned out, their eyes scanning the room with calculated precision. The woman turned toward me, acknowledging me for the first time. Dr. Nina Forrester, she said, her voice now directed at me with clear recognition. Chief Cryptographer, Division 7, Department of Treasury Intelligence. You're being detained under false pretenses. We will be taking over from here. Gasps rippled through the room as my true title, the one I had kept secret for years, was finally revealed. The shock was palpable. My relatives sat frozen, their faces a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and something akin to guilt. As they processed what had just been said, I saw Grandma's tearful eyes widen as she looked from me to the agents, her frail hand reaching out in an instinctive gesture of comfort. I gave her a reassuring look, not wanting her to feel any more confusion than she already did. She didn't deserve this. The woman in charge, still unflinching, turned to Paul. The documents you've provided are misinterpreted, and in some cases they were illegally obtained. Your actions have compromised an ongoing investigation, and now you're under investigation for unauthorized surveillance and data tampering. Paul opened his mouth to protest, but the Deputy Director of Cyber Defense, who had identified me, continued with quiet finality, her eyes hardening. You will be suspended, effective immediately, and barred from accessing any police systems. Your interference has caused significant damage. My brother's face drained of color as the implications of the words settled on him. The quiet murmurs of my relatives grew louder, a whirlwind of shock and disbelief filling the room. It was as if the walls themselves had moved, shifting the narrative they'd always known. The deputy director addressed the family again, turning her focus to them now. Dr. Forrester has been working for the U.S. Treasury on highly sensitive assignments, including breaking an international financial smuggling ring. She is a national asset. Your brother's actions today will be investigated, and the fallout will be far-reaching. There was silence as the weight of the words hung in the air. I could feel the eyes of my relatives on me, the realization settling in. They had no idea who I really was, and what Paul had done in his ignorance had nearly destroyed everything I'd worked for. I didn't look at Paul. I didn't need to. The room had already made its judgment. The family, who had so often dismissed my silence as deception, now had a new narrative to swallow, one that was far more difficult to digest. Grandma, her voice soft but broken, looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. Nina, my sweet girl. Her voice faltered. I never knew. I turned to her, my heart aching for her. It's okay, Grandma, I whispered, giving her a small, comforting smile. I know you didn't, but you know now. Paul was silent, standing in the center of the room, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. His mouth worked, but no words came out. It wasn't just his pride that had been shattered. It was everything he had built his identity on, the assumption that I had been hiding something far less honorable than the truth. As the agents removed the cuffs from my wrists, I could see Paul's fists clenching at his sides, his jaw tight. But he couldn't undo what had been done. No one could. The room fell silent, an oppressive quiet settling in as the federal agents addressed the family, listing my accomplishments with clinical precision. Each word they spoke seemed to reverberate, amplifying the weight of the truth that had been hidden for so long. Dr. Nina Forrester, the Deputy Director of Cyber Defense, continued, her voice firm, is the Chief Cryptographer for Division 7, Department of Treasury Intelligence. She is one of the leading experts in forensic cryptography and has broken numerous international financial smuggling rings. Her work has been instrumental in dismantling some of the largest criminal networks in the world. I couldn't bring myself to look at anyone. My eyes remained fixed on the floor, the weight of the moment too much to bear. My grandmother's soft sobs broke through the silence, her frail body shaking as the truth sank in. I didn't know, Grandma whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know, Nina. I didn't believe you. Her voice cracked with the kind of pain that only a grandmother's love can carry. I felt my throat tighten as the guilt I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years rushed to the surface. But it wasn't just Grandma who was affected. My cousins, once skeptical, now looked at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. Paul, however, stood stock still, his face ashen. He couldn't hide the shock, nor could he mask the shame that flickered briefly in his expression. The deputy director's gaze turned sharply toward Paul, her eyes narrowing with a sense of finality. Your actions today have not only jeopardized your sister's career, she continued, her voice unwavering, but have also compromised an ongoing federal investigation. Your interference will be investigated. A hushed gasp swept through the room. The reality of Paul's actions, of the consequences that would follow, was settling in. His gaze shifted from the agents to me, the confusion and panic clear on his face. I was just protecting the family, Paul stammered, his voice cracking with an edge of desperation. I thought I was doing the right thing. She was lying to all of us. The deputy director raised an eyebrow, as though considering him for a moment. And you thought you could protect them from the truth? She asked, her voice cold. What you did today will have lasting repercussions, Paul. You'll be investigated for obstruction, unauthorized surveillance, and data tampering. You interfered with federal operations, and now we have to clean up the mess you've made. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. For a moment, I saw Paul's entire demeanor crack, his posture slumping, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and humiliation. He looked defeated, though he would never admit it. Not aloud. The silence that followed was unbearable. My relatives, once skeptical and uncertain, now sat in stunned silence, as the truth about my work and my life became undeniable. There was no room left for doubt, and no one, least of all Paul, could deny it now. I could hear Grandma's quiet sobs in the background, her words barely audible. I should have known. I should have believed you, Nina. But I couldn't bring myself to speak. There was nothing left to say. My entire life, my work, my secrecy, had been laid bare in front of my family, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to explain anymore. Paul looked around, his eyes frantic now, trying to grasp onto any shred of control. I was just trying to protect everyone, he muttered, his voice thick with frustration. I thought you were hiding something. I thought you were deceiving us. The deputy director, unfazed by his outbursts, turned to face the rest of the family. It's important to understand that Dr. Forrester's work was classified for a reason. She was not hiding anything from you. She was following the law and doing a job that most of you will never fully comprehend. What Paul did today was reckless, and it has cost all of you more than you know. I could feel the weight of their gazes, but I refused to meet their eyes. The damage had already been done. For the first time, Paul's voice faltered. I didn't know this was who you were. I didn't answer. I couldn't. There were no more words for him. The deputy director's words echoed in my mind. Your interference will be investigated. My heart was heavy with the realization that, despite everything, my brother's actions had not only betrayed me but endangered everything I had worked for. The door to the small conference room clicked shut behind me, and I took my seat at the polished wooden table, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Across from me, my superior, Director Mallory, sat with a stoic expression, his fingers steepled in front of him. Beside him were a couple of legal advisors, serious-faced, their suits sharp enough to cut glass. I could feel the weight of their eyes, all waiting for me to speak. But I remained silent, my hands folded neatly in front of me, my thoughts a quiet storm inside my head. The familiar ache in my chest, the one I'd buried for so long, was there, simmering beneath the surface. But there was no room for emotion now. Director Mallory spoke first, his voice deep and measured. Dr. Forrester, we've already started the investigation into your brother's actions. We've taken the necessary steps to prevent any further complications from his interference. I nodded, my mind still racing back to the dinner table, to the looks on my family's faces when the agents arrived. I wasn't surprised by the betrayal, but it didn't make it any easier. Paul had chosen to destroy me in front of them, and in doing so, had turned my entire life upside down. Director Mallory continued, his voice cutting through my thoughts. You've been through a lot these past hours, and I know you're processing everything, but we need to know how you'd like to proceed. You have the option to press charges against your brother for obstruction, unauthorized surveillance, and data tampering. It's within your rights, and will support you fully if that's your decision. I felt the weight of those words. Press charges. It seemed like a distant concept, something I had never thought about doing to my own flesh and blood. But this wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger than that. My mind flicked back to the botched sting operation I had been involved in, the one Paul's interference had nearly destroyed. Information had been leaked, and it wasn't just my career on the line. Lives had been at risk. I stared at the table for a moment, considering the weight of the decision. Pressing charges could keep Paul off the force for good, but it would also drag our family through the mud. It would further expose the ugliness beneath the surface of our broken relationship. I can't, I said softly, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. I can't go after him in that way. I'm not looking for revenge. I want justice, but not like this. Mallory's eyebrows furrowed in quiet surprise. Are you sure? You've already lost so much because of his actions. This could protect your career and keep him from doing this to anyone else. I'm sure, I said firmly, though it felt like a hard truth to accept. I want the Justice Department to handle it internally. He's still my brother, even if he doesn't understand who I am. He's made his choices, and now he has to face the consequences of them. But I won't be the one to destroy him. Mallory nodded, a silent understanding passing between us. He seemed to respect my decision, though I could tell he didn't entirely agree. The legal advisors exchanged glances, but no one said anything. It was clear they weren't used to someone turning down the opportunity for direct action. The investigation will continue, Mallory said, after a brief pause. Paul will be suspended for now and barred from accessing police systems. His actions will be under full scrutiny, and the repercussions will reach beyond your family. I sat back in my chair, the words sinking in. Part of me wanted to feel relief, but all I could think about were the faces around the dinner table, my cousins, my grandmother. They were victims of Paul's actions too, but their lives weren't at stake in the same way mine was. I would never have imagined that my brother could bring such shame to the family, not like this. We'll support you through this, Dr. Forrester, one of the legal advisors spoke up. And we'll make sure there's no further fallout. You did the right thing. You've kept the peace, even when your career was under attack. I nodded, but the words felt hollow. There was no right thing. There was only the aftermath of Paul's betrayal. The family he had torn apart with his suspicion, his jealousy. And as much as I tried to tell myself that I had done the right thing, I couldn't shake the bitter feeling in my chest. I had to let him fall, and that was something I would never be able to forget. You should rest, Mallory said, his voice breaking through my thoughts. We'll take care of the rest, and when you're ready, we'll move forward with what needs to be done. I didn't answer immediately. I stood up slowly, my body heavy with the weight of it all. As I walked toward the door, I felt a sense of detachment settling over me. The Nina I had been, silent, hidden, buried under family expectations, was gone now. And for the first time, I felt like I was standing on my own, separated from the past I had been holding on to. Outside the room, the agents and my advisors had already begun their work. I walked past them, my steps purposeful, but my thoughts far away. This wasn't just about Paul. This was about everything that had been done to me, to us, without my consent. And now it was time for me to choose my own path, even if that meant leaving my family behind. The phone calls started the next morning, but they weren't from my family. It was the press, calling, emailing, texting, every possible form of communication lighting up my screen. Headlines were already beginning to form, spreading like wildfire across news outlets. Local sheriff arrests federal agent, discovers too late, she was real. The words rang through my head as I scrolled through the notifications. The story was everywhere. I hadn't anticipated this level of exposure, not in my wildest dreams. Every major news network had picked up the story, and social media was lighting up with reactions. The hashtags began to trend almost immediately. She was real. Trust women in STEM. They weren't just about my identity being cleared. They were about something deeper, something far beyond the dinner table. The truth about who I was had finally broken free from the shackles of secrecy and misunderstanding. I wasn't just some app developer, some mysterious, vague professional who had been the subject of family gossip. I was Dr. Nina Forrester, a federal cryptographer, one of the top minds in national security, and the world knew it now. I sat at my desk, staring at the influx of messages, media requests, official statements, and even well-meaning apologies from people I barely knew. The press briefings had been sanitized, of course. They couldn't release classified information, but they didn't need to. They had everything they needed to make the case: the arrest, the federal agents, the official recognition. In some strange, unexpected way, it was like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The years of silence, of pretending to be someone I wasn't just to fit in with my family, were suddenly irrelevant. I had been validated by the system that had once kept me hidden. I could finally exhale. But the most surreal part? The reaction from the public. There were no more whispers about my career being a cover-up or doubts about what I did. Instead, I became something the world could rally behind. Something far more meaningful than just a career woman or a cryptographer. I became a symbol for women in tech, for women in intelligence. There were interviews, news segments, profiles. I did them all, sitting in front of cameras, answering questions, sharing what I could without violating my confidentiality. But for once, the questions were no longer about me trying to prove something. They were about the work, the real work. And it felt good to finally speak my truth. I even started to see it on social media. Posts from other women, from young girls who looked up to me, who saw my story as something to inspire them. I was a person they could look to and think, I could do that too. It was a feeling I'd never experienced before, and it was humbling in a way that left me speechless. As for my family, the calls from them started to trickle in, not as quickly as the media, but they were there. My mother called first, her voice tinged with guilt. "Nina, sweetheart, I just wanted to say I'm so sorry. We didn't know." But there was a distance in her words, a kind of awkwardness that made the apology feel half-hearted. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. Not after everything that had been said, everything that had happened. Then came the text messages from my cousins. They'd heard the story. They apologized, some more sincerely than others, but none of it felt right. I wasn't angry with them, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Not just yet. Paul didn't call. I couldn't say I was surprised. The family's narrative had shifted, and he wasn't part of the new story. He was now the villain in his own tale, a man who had tried to destroy his own sister to protect a fragile, outdated idea of what was right. His actions had consequences, but so did mine. I had distanced myself from them long ago. This wasn't just about me. This was about choosing how to move forward. And moving forward meant letting go of the past. The news continued to pour in, and I gave my interviews, clarified my role, and let the story unfold. But I wasn't naive. I knew that the world would forget, as the world always does. They'd move on to the next story, the next scandal, the next drama. And I would be left with the quiet knowledge of who I had become, a woman who no longer needed anyone's approval, least of all my family's. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, looking out over the skyline, I received a message from Grandma. It was simple, yet it hit me harder than anything else. "I'm so proud of you, Nina. You've always been so much more than I knew. I was wrong to doubt you." Tears welled in my eyes. It was the only message that truly mattered, the only apology I'd ever needed. But I couldn't respond to it in the way she expected. I wasn't ready to reclaim my place in their world. I had built a new one that didn't require me to beg for acceptance. So I left the message unread, sitting in the glow of my apartment, feeling the hum of my new life, the one where I didn't need to explain myself, the one where my chosen family, the team I had built around me, understood me without question. The small, sterile room smelled of freshly brewed coffee and pressed paper. It was a federal meeting space, all white walls and gray carpeting, with the usual bureaucracy hanging thick in the air. I sat at the table across from Paul, my ex-brother, or at least that's how I had begun to think of him. His once confident posture was now slouched, his usual bravado replaced by a nervous tension that seemed foreign on him. He had been decommissioned, stripped of his badge, and now sat across from me, a man broken not by the law, but by his own actions. The consequences of his recklessness had reverberated far beyond our family dinner table, and I could feel the weight of his regret hanging in the air. He spoke first, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. Nina, I don't know where to start. I didn't respond immediately, instead watching him carefully, seeing him fidget in his chair, his eyes avoiding mine. He wasn't the man he once was. This was a man who had crossed a line, one he couldn't uncross, no matter how hard he tried. Finally, he met my eyes. There was something raw there now, sincerity perhaps, mixed with something else. I couldn't tell if it was guilt, shame, or something more, probably all of them. I know what I did. It was wrong, he started, his words coming slowly, like they had to fight their way out. I thought I was protecting everyone, but I only made things worse. I was just angry. I didn't understand what you were doing. I didn't understand you. His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through it. I'm sorry for everything. I studied him, keeping my face neutral, not letting any emotion slip through. I wasn't angry, not anymore. But I wasn't forgiving either. You betrayed me, I said, the words sharp but controlled. You used me to fuel your own insecurities, your resentment. You saw me as a threat, but you never bothered to ask. You never tried to understand. His face flushed, but he nodded slowly. I thought if I exposed you, I'd be right. I thought I could protect everyone from the unknown, from something I didn't understand. He let out a small, bitter laugh. But all I did was destroy everything. The silence between us stretched on, and I let him sit in it. I wasn't here to console him. I wasn't here to make him feel better. I was here because the system had mandated this meeting, and it had been set up by the Justice Department as part of the ongoing investigation. Finally, I spoke again, my voice steady. You mistook silence for deception, and you weaponized our history to justify your failure to understand me. Paul flinched at the bluntness of my words, but I didn't apologize for them. He needed to hear the truth, even if it stung. You saw my quiet, my secrecy, and you assumed the worst, I continued. But my silence wasn't about hiding something. It was about protecting the people I care about, protecting my country. I didn't need to explain myself to you. I never did. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples as if trying to block out the truth I had just laid bare. I never saw it that way. I thought you were just making it all up. I thought you were hiding something. You weren't wrong about one thing, I said, my voice softening for just a moment. I was hiding something, but it wasn't what you thought. It wasn't some fabricated career or a lie. It was my job, my work. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. And I did it to protect people like you, to protect this country. And now, look where we are. Paul didn't reply, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of realization. Perhaps the first time he was truly seeing me for who I was. Not his sister, not the one he had always tried to control, but someone far more complex than he'd ever imagined. I ruined everything, didn't I? He said quietly, almost to himself. His shoulders sagged under the weight of the question, his voice barely audible. I didn't offer him a reassuring answer. I didn't feel like it was my place to soothe him anymore. Instead, I nodded slowly. Yes, you did. But it's not just about you. You compromised everything. The lives of people I worked with, the security of this country. It all came crashing down because of you. Paul's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, I saw his old pride, broken and battered, but still alive in the wreckage he had created. He wanted to apologize again, I could tell, but I didn't let him. He didn't deserve the closure that easily. You're going to be investigated, I said, the words coming with an icy finality. The damage you've done will have to be addressed. You'll be held accountable for what you did. He nodded once, accepting the inevitable, but there was no fight left in him. You'll never understand, I added, a faint edge to my voice. I don't expect you to, but you'll have to live with this, and so will I. For the first time, Paul didn't argue. He simply sat there, his hands trembling slightly as he looked at me. In that moment, I knew everything had shifted. There was no going back. Our history, our family was shattered, and I had to let it go. I stood up, the silence stretching between us, and made my way toward the door. Paul didn't stop me. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply let me go. I hope you find peace, Paul, I said over my shoulder. but I can't be part of that anymore. As I stepped out of the room, the door clicking shut behind me, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. And in that emptiness, I knew that this was the final step in breaking free. 2 years had passed since that night, since the media frenzy, since the betrayal, the humiliation, and the painful unraveling of everything I had once known about my family. Time had shifted things into perspective. More space for the new life I had built, less room for the old. I had gone through stages, processed layers of grief for the family I thought I could belong to, and then moved forward. Now, as I stood in the sleek, minimalistic apartment I called home in Brussels, I had little in common with the person who had been dragged through the mud in that dinner room. The room was quiet, serene, decorated with clean lines and modern art pieces. Nothing overtly flashy, just enough to reflect the balance I had created in my life. I had become someone new, someone stronger, someone far away from the chaos I left behind in the States. I stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline, reflecting on how far I had come. I was no longer the woman who had been tied down by family expectations, who had tried to justify my silence and my secrecy for their comfort. Now I was leading a multinational task force, mentoring young female intelligence officers, and doing something that mattered. I had found purpose in the work I did, and in the people I worked with. The ring of my phone pulled me from my thoughts. I glanced down, seeing a message from Grandma. The heartache from her not understanding me, from her siding with Paul and doubting me, was still fresh enough to make me hesitant. But over the past few years, the distance had softened, and we had spoken a few times. I knew she was trying to rebuild the relationship in her own way. The message read, "Nina, I'm so sorry for everything. I've never been more proud of you. If you can, I'd love for you to publicly claim your place in this family again. I've been wrong, and I want to make it right." I stared at the screen for a long moment. The words were gentle, sincere. I could feel the love in them, but I also felt the weight of what she was asking. It was an emotional pull, one I couldn't ignore, but I could no longer answer the call the same way. I sat on the edge of my couch, my fingers tapping against the phone as I thought about the past, about the dinner, about Paul's betrayal, about everything I had endured. It had all led me here. I had outgrown that version of myself, the one seeking approval from a family who didn't understand the full scope of my life, my work, or my choices. I couldn't let myself fall back into that old role, the one where I needed validation just to exist. I typed a response. "Grandma, I appreciate everything you've said, but my identity, my work, it's no longer for anyone else to claim or to understand. I've built something new, and I'm proud of it. My chosen family, my team, is all I need now. I hope you can understand." I hesitated before hitting send, but then I did. It was final, the closure I didn't know I needed until this very moment. I had no more room to go back to the person who had once desperately sought acceptance from them. I had found new bonds, stronger, unshakable bonds, with those who valued me for exactly who I was, without question. As the message sent, I felt a strange calm. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I just felt free. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find a smiling young officer from my team, holding a bottle of champagne. "Celebration time?" she asked, her eyes bright with excitement. I laughed, the warmth of their camaraderie wrapping around me like a blanket. "Yeah, you could say that." She handed me the bottle, and we clinked glasses as I turned to face the room. My new family, my team. "You've earned this," she said, and I nodded, feeling the truth in her words. As we toasted, I realized that I no longer cared whether my blood family accepted me. I had built something far more meaningful in the past 2 years. People who didn't need explanations, didn't need me to shrink myself to fit into their narrative. They had seen me for who I was all along. I stood there, the room alive with laughter and conversation, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely at peace. I had no regrets about cutting ties with my past. The family that couldn't understand me had faded into the background of my life, no longer defining my worth. It was no longer about being seen by them. It was about being seen by those who mattered, those who stood beside me in the trenches, who valued my strength, my knowledge, and my loyalty. I raised my glass again, this time with a deeper sense of pride. To the future. They echoed the sentiment, and I knew it was exactly where I was meant to be.